It was a cold winter evening when Damien Richards, a reclusive millionaire, noticed a frail little girl rummaging through his trash outside his mansion. Shivering and barely clothed, she looked like a ghost in the night. Damien had everything: wealth, power, luxury, yet the sight of this child, desperate and alone, stirred something deep within him. Without thinking twice, he invited her to live in his garage, a decision that would unravel shocking secrets and turn his life upside down. What he found one day, when he entered the garage without knocking, left him frozen in disbelief. Damien Richards had long been the symbol of success in the small, quiet town of Fairview. Known for his shrewd business acumen, he had amassed a fortune through his real estate empire, owning properties and businesses all over the country. Despite his wealth, Damien lived a rather secluded life, shunning public attention and socializing only when necessary. His mansion sat on the edge of the town, surrounded by high gates and guarded by silence. He preferred it that way. Damien's life had always been focused on success, building his empire brick by brick. Yet, beneath the wealth and comfort, he was haunted by loneliness, a void he had never been able to fill since his wife, Claire, passed away years ago. They had no children, and since her death, Damien's heart had hardened. He trusted no one, and most of the people around him saw him only as a distant figure, a cold and calculated businessman. But everything changed one freezing winter evening. As Damien sat by the fire, sipping his whiskey, he glanced out the window toward the snow-covered driveway. There, just by the trash bins, he saw a small figure huddled in the dark, her hands digging through the bags of discarded food. She was barely more than a child, thin, dirty, and dressed in tattered clothes. Damien frowned. What was a little girl doing in his trash in the middle of the night? Curiosity, and something more, drove him to the door. Wrapping his coat tightly around him, Damien stepped outside into the biting cold. "Hey," he called out, his voice firm but not unkind. The girl flinched and looked up, her face pale and gaunt. Her wide, scared eyes met his, and she froze as if caught doing something unforgivable. "What are you doing here?" Damien asked, softer this time, noticing how fragile she appeared. The girl didn't answer at first, her lips trembling, her small frame shaking in the cold. She looked as though she hadn't eaten in days. I am sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was just looking for some food." Damien stared at her, his mind racing. She couldn't be older than 9 or 10. Why was she out here? Where were her parents? His heart, which had long since grown cold, softened just a little. Without another word, he motioned her toward the garage. "You can stay there for now. It's warmer," he said, his tone gruff, but his intentions kind. The girl looked up at him in surprise, her eyes wide with confusion. But she nodded quickly, grateful for any shelter from the cold. Damien led her to the garage, showing her the small heater and an old mattress that had been stored away. "You can sleep here tonight," Damien said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure something out." The girl thanked him quietly, her eyes downcast. Damien left her there, unsure of what to feel. He hadn't planned on this. He was a man who valued control, and this girl had suddenly disrupted the balance of his isolated life. He didn't even know her name. As Damien lay in bed that night, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept wandering back to the girl. Who was she? Why was she alone? He resolved to ask her in the morning, but little did he know, her arrival in his life would unravel secrets that would change everything he thought he knew. The next morning, Damien went out to the garage to check on the girl. She was sitting on the mattress, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked even smaller in the daylight, her face pale, and her hair a tangled mess. "What's your name?" Damien asked, his voice gentle but direct. The girl looked up at him, hesitating. "Lila," she said softly. "Lila," Damien repeated, nodding. "Where are your parents, Lila?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away. "I don't have any," she whispered. "They're gone." Damien felt a pang of sympathy but remained quiet, waiting for her to continue. "I've been on my own for a while," Lila admitted. "I don't remember how long. I just find places to stay, and sometimes people give me food. I didn't mean to bother you." Damien's heart sank. He had never been a father, but something about this girl's vulnerability stirred a protective instinct in him. He couldn't let her go back to the streets, not after seeing her like this. "You can stay here for a while," he said, surprising himself. "At least until we figure something out." Lila looked up at him, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Days turned into weeks, and Lila stayed in the garage. Damien made sure she had warm clothes and enough to eat. He hired a tutor to come by and teach her during the day, not wanting her to fall behind on education. Despite his initial reluctance, Damien found himself growing attached to the girl. Her presence, though quiet, brought a warmth to the mansion that had been absent for so long. Lila, in turn, began to open up to him slowly. She was still guarded, but she smiled more often, and there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Damien began to look forward to their conversations at the end of each day. He even found himself spending more time at home, eager to check in on her. But as the weeks passed, Damien noticed something strange. Lila was always in the garage, but she was oddly secretive about what she did when he wasn't around. He had given her access to books, toys, and other things to keep her occupied, but there was an unsettling feeling that something was off. Whenever he entered the garage, Lila would quickly close whatever she was working on, her eyes darting nervously. One evening, curiosity got the best of him. Damien decided to enter the garage unannounced. When he opened the door, what he saw froze him in place. Lila wasn't alone. In the corner of the garage, crouched in the shadows, was a man. He looked gaunt and ragged, his clothes dirty, and his face pale. Lila was standing beside him, her hands clutching his arm as if to shield him. Damien's heart raced, anger and confusion swelling inside him. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Lila's eyes filled with fear, and she stepped forward, trying to explain. "He's my brother," she said, her voice trembling. "Please don't be mad. He's all I have left." Damien stood frozen, his mind spinning. A brother? She had never mentioned a brother. How long had he been hiding here? And why hadn't she told him? "I didn't want to burden you," Lila said, her voice breaking. "We've been running for so long. I was afraid you wouldn't let us stay if you knew about him." The man, too weak to stand, leaned against the wall, his breathing shallow. Damien's anger began to dissipate, replaced by a cold realization. These two children were more broken than he had ever imagined. "Why didn't you tell me?" Damien asked, his voice softer now. "I thought you'd send us away," Lila said, tears streaming down her face. "You've already done so much for me. I didn't want to lose that." Damien sighed, his heart heavy. He had been blindsided, but how could he blame her? She was a child, desperate and scared. He looked at the man, her brother, barely more than a skeleton, and guilt washed over him. He had been so focused on helping Lila that he hadn't considered what she might be hiding. "I'm not mad," Damien said finally, his voice gentle. "But you should have told me the truth." Lila nodded, wiping her tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do." Damien looked at the man again. "We need to get him help," he said. "He can't stay like this." Over the next few days, Damien arranged for a doctor to visit the mansion. Lila's brother, whose name was Caleb, was severely malnourished and sick. The doctor recommended immediate hospitalization, but Caleb refused to go, too afraid of being separated from Lila. Reluctantly, Damien agreed to let him stay in the garage while receiving treatment at home. As Caleb slowly regained his strength, Damien learned more about their tragic past. Their parents had died in a house fire years ago, leaving Lila and Caleb orphaned. They had been in and out of foster homes, running away each time to stay together. Caleb had always protected Lila, but in the end, they had both ended up on the streets, struggling to survive. Damien's heart ached for them. He had never known such loss, but he could see the bond between the siblings, their love, their loyalty. It reminded him of what he had lost with Claire. As the days passed, Damien realized something else: he cared for these children more than he had expected to. They had become a part of his life, and he wasn't ready to let them go. One stormy night, everything changed. Damien was working late in his study when he heard a loud crash from the garage. Alarmed, he rushed outside, fearing the worst. When he opened the door, his heart dropped. The garage was in chaos. Tools and boxes were scattered everywhere, and the window had been shattered. But more horrifying was the sight of Caleb, lying unconscious on the floor, blood trickling from his head. Lila was beside him, crying hysterically, her hands shaking. He tried to protect me," she sobbed, her voice barely coherent. "Someone tried to break in." Damien's mind raced. Someone had attacked them. Who? Damien demanded, his voice hard. Who did this? But before Lila could answer, a shadow moved in the corner of the garage. Damien spun around, his eyes locking onto a figure standing in the darkness. It was a man, tall, burly, and dressed in all black. His face was obscured by a mask, but his presence sent a chill down Damien's spine. Instinctively, Damien stepped in front of Lila, shielding her with his body. "Get out," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. The intruder hesitated for a moment, then turned and bolted out the broken window, disappearing into the night. Damien's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched down beside Caleb, checking his pulse. He was still alive, but barely. "We need to get him to the hospital," Damien said, scooping Caleb up into his arms. Lila, still sobbing, nodded and followed him out. That night, as Caleb was rushed into surgery, Damien sat in the waiting room with Lila, his mind spinning. Who had attacked them? And why? It wasn't until the following day that the pieces finally fell into place. The police had been investigating the break-in and discovered that the man who had attacked them was someone from Caleb's past, one of the foster parents they had run away from. He had been abusive, and when they fled, he had been searching for them ever since, desperate to reclaim control over the children he had once tormented. Damien felt a cold rage settle in his chest as he learned the truth. These children had been through so much, and now, even after finding safety, their past had come back to haunt them. But Damien was determined not to let it happen again. When Caleb finally woke up in the hospital, weak but alive, Damien made a decision. "You're not going back," Damien said firmly, looking at both Lila and Caleb. "You'll stay with me. Both of you." Lila's eyes widened in surprise, but there was a flicker of hope in them. "You mean it?" she whispered. Damien nodded. "I mean it. You deserve a family, and I want to give you that." For the first time since he had met her, Lila smiled, a real, genuine smile. And for the first time in a long while, Damien felt something warm in his heart. He had found more than just a little beggar girl rummaging through his trash that night. He had found a chance at redemption, a chance to love again, and a chance to rebuild the family he never thought he would have. And from that moment on, Damien Richards was no longer just a millionaire living in isolation. He was a father, and he would protect his new family with everything he had. The end.